Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Wednesday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. Hope you're having a good week so far. Appreciate you being with me on this Wednesday morning. And we are continuing our look at Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following, as part of our ongoing examination of the Olivet Discourse. Now, as I've stated many times, if it can be demonstrated that Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following referred to Christ's coming at the end of the Old Covenant age in AD 70, then guess what? That basically falsifies all futurist eschatologies. You know, it's my understanding that Kenneth Gentry is currently writing a book, been writing it for a good long while, and boy, do I understand, taking a while to write books. I'm currently writing a book on the last day, the last hour, the last Trump resurrection. I've been working on for over 2 years now, and it just keeps growing, and I keep finding good material and what have you. So I understand that. It's not a criticism in any way of Kenneth Gentry taking a good long while to finish his book on the Olivet Discourse. But in that book, he supposedly is setting out to prove that the Olivet Discourse must be divided into two different subjects. Number one, the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. And number two, the end of time coming of Christ at the end of the current Christian age. Now, as I've said many times, as I just said, if it is demonstrated that Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following cannot be a reference to the end of the current Christian age, then all futurist eschatologies are wrong. Pure and simple, game over, it's done. So I have been sharing with you how Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following must be viewed through the prism of all of these Old Testament prophecies that speak about the end of the age, the coming of the Lord, the coming of the kingdom, salvation, resurrection, etc., etc. Okay? So what I want to do this morning is to look at an incredible text. It is just a mind-blowing text, okay? And that's Revelation chapter 11 and following. Chapter 11, verse 15 and following. And look at what it says. Now, I'm going to begin with verse 15 and examine what it has to say. Then I'm going to show you the actual context in which we must understand and interpret the passage, especially as it relates to Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following. Then the seventh angel sounded. Now, I'm not ready to look at the context about this seventh angel. But let's make no mistake, this seventh angel sounds the seventh trumpet, which is the last trumpet, which is the time of the resurrection. 1 Corinthians 15, 51 and 52. The resurrection is at the sounding of the seventh or last trumpet. Okay. The seventh angel sounded, and there were loud voices in heaven saying, "The kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever." And the 24 elders who sat before God on their thrones fell on their faces, worshipped God, saying, "We give you thanks, O Lord God Almighty, the one who is, who was, and who is to come, because you have taken your great power and reigned. The nations were angry. Your wrath has come, and the time of the dead that they should be judged, and that you should reward your servants, the prophets, and the saints, those who fear your name, small and great, and shall destroy those who destroy the earth." Now then, what is absolutely amazing to me is that Kenneth Gentry says Revelation 11, 15 and following is about AD 70, the end of Israel's Old Covenant age. Are you aware that Kenneth Gentry says that AD 70 signified the full end of the Old Covenant age? Are you aware that Kenneth Gentry now takes a position in his book, Navigating the Book of Revelation, that contrary to popular view, contrary to the majority view, Revelation 21 and following does not describe a yet future event. It describes the events of AD 70. Are you aware of that? So you might well be sitting there going, well, okay, if he says Revelation 11 is AD 70, and if he says Revelation 21 is about AD 70, then where in the name of reason does Kenneth Gentry get a yet future coming of the Lord at the so-called end of time? So I want to spend a little bit of time today and tomorrow analyzing Revelation chapter 11 in its context, so that we can see, okay, you have Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following, talking about Christ entering into the full exercise of his kingdom. Then shall he sit on the throne of his glory. And don't forget, this is depicting Christ having ascended to the Father, being seated at the right hand of the Father, there to rule and to reign in the midst of his enemies. This is all Psalms 110, verses 1 to 4. And at his coming, to put down all of his enemies, and ruling and reigning forever and ever without end. Okay, so let's go back to Revelation chapter 11, verse 15. Listen, folks, there aren't very many commentators. There are some, mostly preterist, or may I say, use the term semi-preterist. It's amazing, Peter Leithart, in his 2-volume set on the book of Revelation, has absolutely amazing things to say about Revelation chapter 11, 15, and following. Moses Stewart, a highly esteemed scholar from the 19th century, has some amazing things to say, applying Revelation chapter 11 to what? AD 70. You know, it's amazing that down through the years, you have some extremely noted scholars who see the context of Revelation chapter 11, they apply it to AD 70, but then they jump ship completely and say, oh, well, that may be true, but we're still looking for the consummation. Keith Matheson, who is a somewhat noted postmillennialist, commenting on Hebrews chapter 12, you have come to Mount Zion. He says, we today, Christians, have come to Mount Zion, and we have received every single thing that the Old Covenant saints anticipated, longed for, prayed for, and looked for. Wait a minute. So here's Keith Matheson saying, we today we possess everything that the Old Testament prophets longed for, looked for. Oh, and by the way, on Revelation chapter 11, 15 and following, guess what? Keith Matheson applies, or at least he did, Keith Matheson changes positions as often as Sam Frost does. But he has taken the position, Revelation 11, 15 and following, speaks of AD 70. And he says the kingdoms of this world have, present tense, become the kingdoms of God. He rules, he reigns forever and ever. And then he turns right around and says, okay, even though we today possess everything that the Old Covenant prophets longed for, prayed for, looked for, and even though Revelation 11 has been fulfilled, we're still waiting for the consummation. Where do you find an additional consummation of Hebrews chapter 12, in addition to where they had arrived and were waiting for its imminent fulfillment? Where do you find in Revelation chapter 11, in the sounding of the seventh trumpet, the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdoms of our God and of his Christ, and that's AD 70. Oh, but wait, we're still waiting for the kingdoms of this world to become the kingdoms of our God and of his Christ. Where do you find that? Well, quite simply, It's not there. You have to engage in massive eisegesis. Eisegesis means you read it into the text. You don't engage in exegesis, which means you take it out of the text. Okay? So, what do we find in Revelation chapter 10 and 11? And yes, chapter 10, and I'll explain the reason that I refer to that here momentarily. But what do we find in these passages, which are admittedly talking about the same thing as Matthew chapter 25, 31 and following? What do we find that demands a first century fulfillment? Well, we find the following. Let's go to Revelation chapter 10, 7 and following. John, in his vision, saw two angels. The one, in verse 5, he says, "The angel whom I saw standing on the sea and on the land raised up his hand to heaven, swore by him who lives forever and ever, who created heaven and the things that are in it, the earth and the things that are in it, the sea and the things that are in it, that there should be delay no longer. But in the days of the sounding of the seventh trumpet," or seventh angel, which is going to sound the seventh trumpet, "when he is about to sound, the mystery of God would be finished as he declared to his servants the prophets." Now, here's what you need to know. And this is admitted by virtually all commentators on the book of Revelation that I'm aware of. David Chilton, in his massive book, Days of Vengeance, acknowledged it. Keith Matheson acknowledges it. G.K. Beale acknowledges it. And again, virtually every commentator of which I'm aware that goes into any analysis of the text acknowledges Revelation chapter 10, 6 and 7 is a direct echo of Daniel chapter 12. In Daniel chapter 12, Daniel saw a vision of the Great Tribulation. And no, this was not the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. He saw and heard in the vision of the coming resurrection of those who sleep in the dust of the earth. Some will arise, some to everlasting life, some to everlasting condemnation. He saw a vision of the end of the age, the time of the end, and the gathering, by the way. The synagogue. You know, the gathering of Matthew 13. The gathering of Matthew 13 in which Jesus cites from Daniel chapter 12. Yeah. So, in Daniel's vision, he saw two angels. One has his hand on the sea, or foot on the sea. One has his foot on the land. And he lifts his hands and he swears by him who lives forever and forever. One angel asked, "When shall these things be? When shall all of these things be fulfilled?" And that angel standing on the sea and on the land says, "It shall be for a time, times, and a half time, and when the power of the holy people has been completely shattered, all of these things must be fulfilled." Now wait a minute. If you'll remember in my review of Kyle Pope's book, Thinking About AD 70, I demonstrated how he goes down through the text. And even though Daniel chapter 12, verse 7, all of these things would be fulfilled when the power of the holy people is completely shattered, Kyle Pope is forced to say, well, you know, in some texts, all doesn't mean all. Well, it's obviously true. But you see, ladies and gentlemen, just because all can be qualified in some text does not mean it's qualified or limited in this text. That's a violation of logic. It's called an illegitimate totality transfer. When you go to this text over here and you find a definition and you impose it on this text over here, even though they are two totally different contexts. And yet that's exactly what Kyle Pope did. He's guilty of illegitimate totality transfer. And other commentators including Sam Frost, by the way, does the identical thing. Oh, well, all doesn't always mean all. That is not the point. Unless you can prove from the text. You cannot say, well, you know, the resurrection hasn't happened, therefore all doesn't refer to the resurrection. No, that's presuppositional eisegesis. You are assuming your view of resurrection to be true, and you haven't proven that. Well, I'm already out of time for today, but here's what we're going to do. Tomorrow we're going to continue our look at Revelation 10, Revelation chapter 11, and the context which it sets for us to demonstrate that while it is parallel to Matthew 25:31 and following, it's the time of the resurrection, it's the time of the gathering, okay? Revelation chapter 11 absolutely, undeniably cannot be a prediction of a yet future coming of the Lord at the end of the Christian age. You do not want to miss that. In the meantime, hey, don't forget, save yourself over $20 by taking advantage of our February 2022 U.S. orders only special book price. Go to my website, donkpreston.com, bibleprophecy.com, banner up at the top, click it, make your order. You will be glad you did. Out of time. See ya on the flip side.